I am Kathy Shepard-Jones. I'm the training director of the Training Innovation Project, also known as TIP. And I want to welcome you to our very first master class. And master classes are a way to do a deep dive into topics that are critical to improving employment outcomes for people with disabilities. Today's topic is setting the record straight about hiring and retaining disabled workers, debunking myths. It will be led by Dr. Philip Rumrell, who I will introduce in just a moment. Captioning is available for this masterclass. We're also grateful to the Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehabilitation for helping us be able to offer Certified Rehabilitation Counselor, or CRC, credits. For those of you who are seeking CRC credit today, please put your name and your email address in the chat, and you will receive your CRC verification credit email from the Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. I would also like to invite everyone to attend our next learning opportunities, which are the business case for hiring and retaining qualified people with disabilities on July 21st at 12 Eastern. This is a lunch and learn event, and it'll be shorter and they're pretty informal. And we will also be hosting the first annual Workforce and Employer Engagement Summit, September 22nd, from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern. And both of those events are going to be offered by Zoom, and you can go to our website, tiptrain.com, to register. We'll put that website in the chat also. And I think that Dr. Rumrell will even be joining us for the summit also. So we will be sharing evaluation information at the end of the presentation. We should have time for questions at the end of the presentation, and you can also enter them in the Q&A box at any point. And if we run out of time, we will respond to any questions that we didn't get to answer by email to our attendees. The accessible recording of today's presentation will be made available at tiptrain.com also. Okay, that's all of our housekeeping. So now it is my honor to introduce Dr. Philip Rumrell, who is the Red Cedar Distinguished Professor of Counseling and Counselor Education at Michigan State University. And the content that he is sharing came from work as part of the Retain Kentucky Project, Dr. Rumrell's national disability management work with a number of employers over the years, and the contents of this presentation were also developed under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education and do not necessarily represent the policy of the department. So with that, I want to thank you for being with us today, Dr. Rumrell, and now I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Shepard-Jones. It's a great honor and privilege to be with you today and reconnect with my dear friends in Kentucky. Really delighted that this TIP training program is off the ground and running in the same fashion as all of your other projects. And I want to add my thanks to the Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehabilitation for their efforts to make sure that CRC continuing education units are available for this program today. I am looking forward to the next Lunch and Learn program, and I do intend to join you virtually at the symposium in September. We did a few of those, going back a few years ago, and they were great fun, always well attended. And there's some really very exciting and innovative things happening in Kentucky as it applies to the inclusive workforce. So it's just great to be with you all. And Dr. Shepard-Jones, I have the next slide would be the acknowledgement, but I think you may have covered that, right?
I did. I think we're ready for your objectives.
All right, and thanks for advancing the slides. I'm on the slide about our objectives today. Dr. Shepard-Jones, are you on the video today?
I I am on the video, but I had turned my video off.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. If you're off, I'm on phone, so I don't need to do a visual description then, right?
Correct. Unless you'd like to. You're welcome to.
No, I don't like to. It's rather humbling, actually. So I prefer not to. How about that?
Fair
Uh,
enough.
but what we wanted to do today, uh, three things in particular, and I really appreciate the opportunity to dig into this. What I think is a very interesting a subject in some depth. We do want to discuss what I view as considerable progress toward a workforce that is more inclusive and, friends, indeed fully inclusive, because that's the goal, fully inclusive of people with disabilities. That's the first objective. Want to describe, even with that progress, some ongoing concerns on the part of employers about hiring and accommodating workers with disabilities. And in any kind of demand side work that we do, as in our Retain Kentucky project that you mentioned, Dr. Shepard-Jones, we want to respond fully to employer concerns. We want to treat them all as valid, because that is what we're working with. And we find employers to have generally positive attitudes toward hiring and accommodating workers with disabilities, but there do persist some concerns. And we want to address some of those concerns that we would regard as myths or misconceptions. And the third objective then is to review empirical evidence from work that we've done and our colleagues around the country have done that suggests to us that workers with disabilities are equal to the task, and sometimes more than equal to the task, in comparison to non-disabled workers. Therefore, some of these myths and misconceptions that employers do hold and do report to us don't always stand up to the empirical evidence. And I would suggest humbly that we, as rehabilitationists, as direct service providers, as vocational specialists, as disability advocates, we have an opportunity, but also, I believe, an obligation to set the record straight when we have an opportunity to do that. And we have more opportunities to do that, I would suggest, than at any other time in my career, certainly, because we have employers' attention. We have a valuable labor resource in the disability community, and employers see us increasingly as very important consultants and content area experts in supplying labor in the era of a national labor shortage, and also making sure that the workforce fully represents the characteristics of our broader society. So I've probably already reflected more than you care to hear me do on the American labor market. I probably already did that, but let me just click off a few things here just to set the foundation for what I want to talk about in the rest of our time together. Could we go to the next slide, Dr. Shepard-Jones? Thank you. So a few things we know. This has been a really interesting time, and that's probably not the right word. There are other words we could use, but if you go back to the inception of the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that 50 million Americans had their employment interrupted in 2020 or 2021, just a staggering at a 14% rate of unemployment in the general economy. We think that somewhere around 10 million of these people who had their employment interrupted have never returned to work, although we don't really have a precise number. It's really hard to get that broad aggregate kind of data. We also hear from a number of sources that 20 million new jobs have been created since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've sort of been all over the place. I'm throwing these huge inflationary numbers around, inflationary in terms of just the magnitude of them, that have been really swirling since this unprecedented public health and economic crisis we know as COVID-19, right? And then, of course, we saw and Dr. Shepard-Jones, right in the middle of our retained Kentucky statewide workforce development project. We were right in the middle of this, a pivot to virtual and remote work. Even our workforce development intervention was entirely virtual. Then back to the physical workplace. Now we're seeing growing flexibility on the part of employers. Some workers went back to the office, didn't like it. They want to go back to working at home. And there's all of this back and forth that goes on between where work is performed. But we do know that we have the ability to do work in various locations and in a really different way than we did before. All of this really goes without saying. Certainly don't need to tell a bunch of people interested in employment and disability about the growth in sectors of our economy, such as technology. Enough said about that. Finance in particular, banking, healthcare, of course, and this is a 30 or 40-year arc of growth in healthcare, energy, particularly clean energy, but all kinds of energy, the arts and entertainment, restaurants, hotels, hospitality, transportation, delivery services, and a new spin on manufacturing, particularly as it applies to supporting the technology in infrastructure, as jobs have been coming and going in and out of this country, and we're trying to redecide what kinds of products we're going to make here and what things are we going to outsource. So a lot of the one constant really does seem to be change. With that, we've got a really unprecedentedly prosperous economy by many metrics. An unemployment rate of 4.3%, not historically low. There have been slightly lower readings at different times, but still very, very low. At the same time, the rate of labor force participation, which is the percentage of working age adults who are actually employed for pay, is down in the general population. That means everybody, people with and without disabilities, currently at around 72% of working age people. We go on to so we've got plenty of employment opportunities, not as many people engaged in the labor force. And Dr. Shepard-Jones, if we go to the next slide, just a few more, one of the reasons for this has to do with what we call the graying of America. And we know that there are just proportionally more retirees and fewer workers to support the economy because of population age demographics. You know, we have 73 million living Americans who were born between 1946 and 1964. We call that the baby boom generation. They have one thing in common, all 73 million of them. They're not getting any younger. And birth rates went down after 1964, so we have, relatively speaking, more elderly people, and those people are living longer and longer than ever before. They're living long past retirement age. The number of people in America over the age of 65 will double between 2010 and 2030. The number of 90-year-olds in America has quadrupled since the early 1980s. So we see this population shift and growing proportionally and in sheer number among folks who are not currently engaged in the economy. We add all of this up and we talk about this being a full employment economy with low unemployment, plenty of jobs available, but fewer workers to fill those jobs, and that adds up to a national labor shortage. This was true, Dr. Shepard-Jones, when we were working together in Kentucky. 2 jobs open statewide for every available applicant for employment. Those numbers seem to be holding from state to state. It varies a little bit, but Kentucky was somewhere in the middle in terms of that. So 2 jobs open for each applicant. Employers are really leaning right now because they need the help, and for other reasons, of course. But we find that we have found they're more receptive than ever before to the idea of hiring and accommodating workers with disabilities. But even with all of these things going for us, what we know is that only around 38 or 39% of working age adults with disabilities in the United States are currently employed for pay. So we go from a 72% rate of labor force participation in the general population, which includes people with disabilities. When we look specifically at the disability community and people of working age, 38, 39% rate of labor force participation. It varies a little bit over the last few months. Friends, this just simply isn't good enough. It never has been. And we have not only an opportunity to help make better matches between people's skills and interests and abilities and the available jobs in our economy, but I believe we have the obligation to do that. There is just simply no reason, given the economic climate and the demand for workers, that we're not doing a better job of keeping people, of helping people find jobs that they can maintain over time. Employers need our help to make this happen, to build this more representative workforce. Sometimes employers do that because it's a social imperative. They feel it's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's simply a supply and demand issue. They need the workers, okay? And therefore they need our help, because we have a group of people who are ready, willing, and able to work, and are being underutilized as a labor resource. So let's get into the next slide, setting the record straight about hiring and retaining workers with disabilities. And if we go to that slide, Dr. Shepard-Jones, here we talk about, in spite of the significant progress that we're talking about, progress in process and attitude and capacity, we still see the numbers lagging far behind in terms of participation in the workforce. And so we ask employers how they feel about hiring and accommodating workers with disabilities, and they tell us that they love all workers, including people with disabilities and people with every kind of characteristic you can imagine. But as we drill down a little bit in a recent study that we conducted of Fortune 500 employers, we found a large number of stereotypical attitudes and beliefs about hiring workers with disabilities, that as we started thinking about it, after we collected these myths and after we collected their perspectives, many of them, as I was saying before, really didn't hold up to empirical evidence. And Mr. Johnny Collette, who I think is here on the call today, helped me a couple of years ago with some information from the United States Department of Labor and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce about some of the concerns employers have about hiring workers with disabilities. Putting these together, I've pulled out the ones that I really believe are myths and misconceptions, and I wanted to subject these myths and misconceptions to what we can find as far as empirical evidence go, essentially to set the record straight about how we go about helping more workers with disabilities to join or stay in the workforce, and helping more employers to fill the labor shortage with these qualified, capable, and productive workers. That's what we're hoping to do. Let's go on to the next slide, Dr. Shepard-Jones. I have these stated in the kind of the null hypothesis form. I'm going to read the myths first. These are not in any particular order of priority or importance, but you'll sort of see how we do this. So I'll give you the myth, and then I'll give you the facts that would suggest that that would dispel the myth. Okay. So the first one, here is a myth that employers do continue to hold. Most people with disabilities prefer not to work. Okay, I'm not going to repeat that. I don't even like to have those words, in my mouth. But this is one that does come up in our work with employers. But so as we mentioned before, 39% of working age adults with disabilities are currently employed for pay. So most of them are not currently working. But then we get to the issue of, do they prefer not to do that? Well, a couple things we know. Of those people with disabilities who are not currently employed, 75% of them tell us that they would like to be employed. And 80% of these unemployed people believe that they have the ability to work. Moreover, 70% of all Americans who receive supplemental security income, SSI, or Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, benefits from the Social Security Administration say that they would prefer to be working. They would prefer to be working as opposed to receiving benefits. And if any of you have ever received SSI or SSDI, I'll bet these figures would hold in your experience that this is not an aspiration that people hold, and the people who are on them would prefer not to be. So I would submit to you that the low rate of participation in the workforce among people with disabilities is not a motivational issue that they would prefer not to work. It is a problem with opportunity, and we can do a lot about that. So that's the first one. I'm glad we started with that one because that really sets the tone for the rest of what we want to say. So let's just stipulate that most people with disabilities want to be in the workforce just like everybody else does. Dr. Shepard-Jones, could we go on to the next slide, please? Here's another one. People with disabilities have a limited range of career interests. We think they only want to, employers think, some employers, that they only want to be involved in particular kinds of fields, whatever it might mean, may not have that much exposure to the world of work. And what we know, in fact, is that people with disabilities have a wide range of interests and career aspirations. We see this over and over. We should not, their disability should not in any way limit their career options. I'm sure that anyone tuning into this master class would agree with this. But we know a few more things about vocational interests and how they're formed and how durable they are. We know that disability, for example, particularly adventitious disability or acquired disability, disability that happens at some point in the life cycle rather than when you're born with it, has no effect whatsoever on vocational interests. If you were a nurse and working in the healthcare field at the time you acquired your disability, chances are your interests don't change because of that, because your vocational interests are deeply rooted and tied in with your personality, and personality doesn't change as a function of disability. So you still want to do those things, although you may have to go about that perhaps in a different way. As we look more broadly at career interest assessments, we find, in fact, that people with disabilities have the same range of interest as non-disabled people do. And I'm not sure why we would expect, anything more than that. Anything other than that is what I mean. Vocational interests are very stable over time. They are normally distributed among people with and without disabilities. And I would submit humbly that a lack of employment experience should not be confused with a lack of vocational interest, just like a lack of opportunity in the workforce should not be confused for a lack of motivation. So those are our first two myths. Dr. Shepard-Jones, I'm going to pause right here and just make sure that we're doing okay on the next myth, which would be the third one.
We are there, Dr. Rumrell.
Okay, very good. And can you tell me, are questions coming into the to the chat? Are we recording?
I'm going to ask Brandon and Beth to let us know if we received any questions in the chat or the Q&A at this point.
Okay. Feel free to stop me as we go from one slide to the next or at any point along the way. And hopefully we'll leave time at the end anyway if people want to dialogue, okay?
Dr. Rumrell, we do have one question. Let me make sure I read it carefully here. In terms of the employment rates of those without disabilities, have we controlled for the lack of identification of disability due to the state of healthcare and insurance costs today compared to other times?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is, in the figures I've been giving you, We have not controlled for that. There's really no way at the aggregate level to parse out someone who has a disability but who doesn't identify as such. And you may have someone who has a disability who identifies as such, in a survey, but certainly isn't going to identify to their employer, right? Or may not identify even to family members and friends. And we certainly respect everyone's prerogative to construct and characterize their identity exactly as they wish to. And in this era of open records and technology being what it is, the things we can learn about people in ways that we, never could before. The issues of privacy and protection of health-related information and identity-related information is a huge concern. So the short answer to that great question is, in my remarks here, I have not controlled for that. That does certainly create an imprecision in how we in how we characterize the population. There's going to be overlap back and forth. Someone might be considered disabled under one criteria or in one inquiry and not in another, or they may choose at different times to identify themselves in various ways. So that's a confound that we always have to deal with. But the figures I've given are from people who do tacitly identify as disabled or who tacitly identify as not. It's a great question, and I really appreciate that's an extremely thoughtful deep dive into this. Thank you.
No other questions, Dr. Rumwell.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, here's another myth I want to submit to you. People with disabilities are not well prepared for the world of work. We do hear this from employers. It was in the study that I mentioned before. And let's just take a look at this. We know that public schools begin preparing students with disabilities for their careers as early as age 14, often earlier than they begin preparing students who don't have disabilities. This is thanks, of course, to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, all the emphasis on pre-employment transition services and transition services. So we're catching kids early in the process and doing, frankly, I think a really good job of helping kids with disabilities getting their career aspirations and goals and interests lined out. Then I think about the career and technical education system programs in public schools, and these are so well known for preparing students with disabilities and students without disabilities for that matter, for high demand occupations in skilled trades, in careers that don't necessarily require a 4-year higher education. And these programs uniformly around the country are excellent and known for their inclusivity. So if a student with or without a disability has an interest in skilled trades in particular, there's a tremendous pipeline of support and preparation for them as well. And we mentioned our friends at the Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. How about the state federal vocational rehabilitation program in all 50 states and U.S. territories? Provides job training and a wide range, of course, of employment assistance to literally millions of people with disabilities, greater than a 50% success rate in closing people's cases in competitive integrated employment. People with disabilities do have a place to go for employment preparation, in addition to what happens in the public schools. Let's look at higher education. The number of students with disabilities attending colleges and universities has increased by more than 800% since 1980. So, of course, we've had a very important civil rights law to facilitate access. We will talk about the inclusive higher education imperative and movement, where young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are coming to colleges and universities who were once thought to not be college material. Guess what? They're here on our campuses. They're taking courses. They're gaining skills. They're preparing for their careers. So our colleges and universities are more open than they ever before. And then let's look at the growing numbers of people who acquire their disabilities either at work and receive services from the workers' compensation system, in the military, and in mid-career for one reason or another. These folks often have extensive work experience. So we find and would insist that it's simply not the case that workers with disabilities are not well prepared for employment. In fact, we think we've got a very well prepared and well trained labor resource in the disability community. Dr. Shepard-Jones will go on to the next slide if you don't mind. Here's a myth. People with disabilities work mostly, sorry, let me start again. People with disabilities mostly work in entry-level minimum wage jobs, okay? Few things we know about that. We know that workers with and without disabilities start their careers in these kinds of employment in entry-level jobs. That's how it works. So young people with disabilities certainly do that. People who have not yet engaged in the workforce really at any age and they're just starting, that is where people would definitely need to begin, but we don't think this is a disability-specific phenomenon. We know that workers with disabilities have similar rates of promotion and salary increases as non-disabled workers once they're in and once they receive the supports that they need to continue in employment. And we find that workers with disabilities contribute to the economy at all levels of employment. And Dr. Shepard-Jones, nowhere did we see this phenomenon in greater focus than during our Retained Kentucky project. I'm thinking of the nearly 3,200 people with mid-career disabilities who came to our Retained Kentucky project, and I'm just thinking about the range of occupational statuses, the salary range, the kinds of jobs that people did. It really did reflect the entire workforce in the state. So we see that entry level and minimum wage jobs become the place to start. But if we provide the supports that people need, they by no means become a status that people need to be resigned to. Now, Beth or Dr. Shepard-Jones, any questions, comments in the chat we should deal with before going on to the next one?
No, sir.
Okay. The next slide then, Dr. Shepard-Jones, here's another myth. Workers with disabilities require too many accommodations. Okay, let's take a look at this one. So we do hear this from employers. The accommodation process is too cumbersome. They need too much support. And let's just look at the sheer number, okay? And we see this in several cross-disability studies, and it does vary from disability type to disability type. But overall, what we do see, Dr. Shepard-Jones, I found this interesting, and I think we saw this something very similar in Retained Kentucky. Only about 1/3 of workers with disabilities nationwide report using any accommodations at all. Now, this might be an identification issue and disclosure issue, which the first question really not alluded to it. It took head on. This may be part of it, so we would ask why relatively few workers with disabilities actually use accommodations. One might be that they don't need them. The other might be that they're hesitant to request accommodations because they have to disclose their disability status. They fear their employers wouldn't meet their needs, whatever that might be. But let's go on to the next bullet. Of those workers with disabilities who do use accommodations, the average number in combining the results from several studies is 1.8 distinct accommodations. So only 1/3 of workers with disabilities use any accommodations at all. Of those folks, the average number they use is less than 2. in terms of the accommodation strategy itself. We also know, getting to the point about disclosure, I think, also many workers with disabilities do self-accommodate in ways that employers and coworkers never even realized. And this has been easier to accomplish for workers with disabilities in the COVID-19 era, as we pivoted to remote work and then back to office. Everybody was accommodating themselves in whatever way they wanted to. And so these are ones that would not show up in any of these metrics. But I would submit if only 1/3 of workers with disabilities are using any accommodations at all, and those who do use them are using an average of less than 2 accommodations, the number of accommodations to me shouldn't be the main obstacle. It's just it shouldn't be a barrier. We'll go on to the next slide, please. I view this to be a myth as well. People with disabilities require expensive, with a P, although it could be with a T, I guess. But let's say, as it is here, expensive, cost too much accommodations. People with disabilities require expensive accommodations. Okay. Well, let's go to what our friends at the Job Accommodation Network tell us. Jan tells us that 57% or so of all disability-related accommodations used by workers with disabilities nationwide cost nothing at all. In fact, have no initial cost. That's the qualifier. Have no upfront cost. 57% don't cost anything to get started. Indeed, the most common form of workplace accommodation for people with disabilities is, would you believe, schedule modifications and flexibility in the way work is performed time-wise. And then the next most common happens to be changes in the work location, as you all might imagine. So those, I'm not to suggest that schedule modifications cost nothing. Sometimes they do have a cost associated with them, but these are not large ticket items. It can be done with a good measure of common sense, and it becomes the most common form of accommodation, modifying people's schedules. Now, of the 43% of workplace accommodations that do bear a cost to help a worker with a disability stay employed, the average expenditure is $517. And $517, we think, and we have many testimonials from employers as well, that is a good investment in job retention, especially compared to the high cost of employee turnover, of replacing good workers. That job sits open when somebody leaves. Then you post the job. Maybe you fill the position, maybe you don't. You've got a learning curve from the new person coming in, and it's better to keep a good or even a marginally good worker employed than it is to have them leave their job altogether. And really good workers are certainly well worth it. But most employers tell us $517 to avoid turnover and keep good workers going. It's just not the issue. And any accommodation that does constitute an undue hardship to the employer, and we all know this is determined on a case-by-case basis, but if the accommodation is unduly disruptive or expensive or would negatively affect customers or coworkers in some way, the employer can choose not to provide that accommodation in the first place. So we don't think that the expense of accommodations should be the reason to keep workers with disabilities out of the workforce. And I'm not suggesting that anyone is trying to keep workers with disabilities out of the workforce, but as we work with employers and understand that they do have these concerns, we need to respond to these concerns in a respectful way, in a way that validates whatever the issue might be. But when we know the correct answer and when we can share with them information that might change their way of thinking and might create an opportunity or many opportunities for a good, qualified, and capable worker who's not engaged in the labor force or is struggling to retain employment, again, I think we're obligated to share this information. Dr. Shepherd-Jones, we can go on to the next slide if you like. I do want to, again, pause here, see if there's anything in the chat. And I also want to invite my colleague, Dr. Shepherd-Jones, to reflect on anything that I've said up to now.
There are no questions in the chat right now.
And this is Dr. Shepherd-Jones, and I would just say that I really appreciate the way that you're approaching these myths, and also particularly around the 1/3 of individuals needing accommodation. Would you say also that employers who use universal design in their approach may have something to do with that as well?
I absolutely would. And, because those accommodations that are essentially covered by, that are brought about by universal design, those don't show up anymore, right, as accommodations. Because the person doesn't have to request the accommodation, doesn't have to go through the sometimes stigmatizing process of disclosing their disability status. You don't have to make yourself vulnerable by petitioning your employer, and then they send you over to HR, and we know how that process can work. Sometimes it works very well, often it doesn't, but isn't that what universal design is all about? It's to accommodate the widest range of constituents, the largest number of employers, with generalized strategies that don't single people out for whatever their needs might be. And Dr. Shepherd-Jones, I think you're absolutely right. These are not showing up. So people who formerly would have had to request an accommodation of one kind or another, if that's a measure that is now available to all employees, it's no longer a workplace accommodation, because an accommodation by definition is specifically for a worker with a disability to meet their individual needs. So universal design has actually, I'm quite certain, has decreased the proportion of people with disabilities who would say that they use workplace accommodations, because in many ways they're already being accommodated. The example that comes to mind here is kind of a no-brainer, and everyone knows it. It's working at home. We would work with people who had mobility considerations or couldn't access transportation. We would try to get employers to allow people to work from home as a disability-related accommodation. What happened during the pandemic? Everyone who could work at home did. And so it literally made it no longer an accommodation that anyone had to ask for, because people were being required to work from home. So yes, I think the universal design is really the obverse of individual accommodation, and we still want people to be able to come and request accommodations to meet their own individual needs. But I think we are gradually but steadily, we're reducing the need for people to petition their employers for individual accommodations, and I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a great example also. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, another myth. From our study, employers' insurance costs will increase if they hire workers with disabilities. Okay, I will commend to your attention a survey, and they've done many, of course, a survey of human resource managers conducted by our friends at Cornell University, Dr. Suzanne Bruyere and her team. They find over and over that companies' health, life, and disability insurance costs rarely rise because of hiring workers with disabilities. When you buy insurance, health insurance, life insurance, whatever it is, you're an employer and you buy it from a third party to cover your members of your workforce. This is usually done on a capitation basis. You pay so much per person, and your premiums over time will be determined based on how much healthcare is utilized. Let's talk about healthcare insurance in any given year. But one thing we know about that is that people with disabilities utilize healthcare services. I find this interesting. We see this over and over. People with disabilities utilize healthcare services, including mental health services, at virtually identical rates and at virtually identical costs as non-disabled workers. So having a disability or identifying as a person with a disability doesn't necessarily mean that you're using healthcare any more than anyone else does. Sometimes it does mean that, but by and large, employers report to us that their insurance costs, workers' compensation costs, you name it, insurance doesn't go up because you hire workers with disabilities. It just doesn't. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to let employers know. And they can, with their current insurance carriers, they can ask them these kinds of questions and find out, but they're going to find out over and over that usually it's a flat rate per worker, and they usually don't inquire into the particular health status of any of the covered people when you enter into a contract with an insurer, regardless of what the insurance might be for. We'll go on to the next slide, please. Another one, myth: people with disabilities call in sick more often than other workers. Okay, well, we see over and over in studies, some that we've done, some that other people have done, we find that workers with disabilities have very similar, sometimes lower, rates of absenteeism and sickness, meaning leave related to sick leave. So this is before short-term and long-term disability. These are just absences in general. We find that they're about the same as other employees. That disability doesn't necessarily mean you're going to call in sick. Now, it does matter what the condition might be. So if you've got a chronic health condition, we know that people who have diabetes do use more sick leave. They do have more absences than people who do not have diabetes, but this is a chronic multi-systemic condition. And not all people with disabilities have chronic conditions that they have to deal with. So it's not disability status that determines whether someone will call in sick. It really has to do with their acute health status. And workers with disabilities over and over, we find, use sick leave and have attendance records that are about the same as non-disabled workers. Next slide, please. Another myth: people with disabilities are, I'm sorry, let's try this again. Myth: people with disabilities are not as productive as other employees. I know I had trouble saying that because it's just not true. You know, we know that job accommodations often allow workers with disabilities to be even more productive, certainly more productive than they were before the accommodation, but sometimes more productive than other workers because they're really operating at peak efficiency when they have the supports that they need, right? Go figure. That's simple enough to work, isn't it? And we know that job coaching and other workplace supports over and over, these have proven their cost effectiveness, that they enhance productivity, and these are available to people through a wide range of resources, including our state federal vocational rehabilitation program and other vendors. I would also direct your attention to the DuPont Corporation's years of equal to the task studies, and those studies have found over and over that workers with disabilities have very similar rates of productivity and safety, and that becomes important as non-disabled employees. We really want to just emphasize here, bottom line here is that disability does not equate with or equate to lower productivity. Those two things are not the same. And so, and with the supports and with accommodations, with universal design features embedded in the workplace, there are situations where workers with disabilities can really excel if they have the supports that they need. when productivity suffers, it's usually not because of disability-related reasons. It's because of support reasons. Supports aren't available. It has to do with communication. It has to do with the relationship between the person and coworkers and supervisors. And those things really aren't disability-related matters. If a person has a disability, it is incidental to that. But the things that really do threaten productivity are generally not disability-specific. We'll go on to the next slide, please. Another myth: people with disabilities require extra time to learn new job tasks. Okay, so we'll think about this as a cognitive or intellectual consideration, and it is a fact that some disabling conditions do affect cognitive or intellectual functioning. It's also a fact that most disabling conditions do not. Indeed, friends, only 12% of ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, covered disabilities are known to result in difficulties with learning, with information processing, memory, executive functioning. Only 12% are known to have cognitive or intellectual effects. And isn't it true that all employees, whether they have a disability label or not, learn and retain information at their own rate, in their own way, and we can help thinking about assistive technology, but also talk about universal design. Dr. Shepard-Jones, how about AI as an accommodation solution for many, many people? And look what we can do now with technology that can help people, workers with and without disabilities, help them to learn skills, to remember information, to organize and prioritize the tasks, to perform certain tasks, and to communicate effectively, to monitor their own work performance. The things we can do now with technology, and next week there are going to be even more things that we didn't think of this week. It's changing that quickly, but with the ability to get information in and out and to process it and to retrieve it, aided by technology, we actually think that the cognitive and intellectual effects of disability are going to become less onerous for the worker, and they're going to be less limiting in people's ability to do their work. So we see these as encouraging things. But yes, some workers with disabilities will have difficulty learning new tasks. So will some workers without disabilities. And if we approach this from an individual need standpoint instead of as a disability matter, we think we could we'd probably get more. We would definitely get more work done, and we'd be providing opportunities to folks who are currently not engaged in the labor force. Of course, we can visit the Job Accommodation Network and just see the range of cognitive support technology that they have as part of their repository. It's really just an incredible resource. We'll go on to the next slide, please.
Dr. Rumrill,
yes.
Dr. Rumrill, if
Please.
I may read one of the comments in the chat.
You
I
may.
apologize for the interruption. John
Please.
Drummond says, so across all hires, the cost of accommodations comes out to an average of $222.31 per hire, since the median worker across all workers stays in a job an average of 3.9 years. This amounts to an annual cost of merely $57. Now, since a full-time employee typically works 2,080 hours a year, this amounts to less than 3 cents an hour, or 21.6 cents a day. Marsha Blessing says, most of my customers with disabilities want to work, and that shows as productivity. And then Jonathan follows with, and the cost is likely even less, as Phil has noted in past presentations, that with accommodations, employees with disabilities tend to stay loyal to employers over longer periods. And Anne Marie Brown says she agrees, and very true.
Well, Marsha, thank you for your point. Appreciate it. Anne Marie, appreciate that. And Colonel Drummond, they didn't tell me there was going to be math on this presentation, but this fellow does have a way of making a lot of sense, and John, as you amortize the cost of that in the way that you did, you make accommodations seem even more cost effective than I did. So I want to talk to you about joining me on the next one, because as always, you tell a better story than I do. So thank you, John. Thanks, Beth. Dr. Shepard-Jones, next one. Coworkers do not feel comfortable working with people with disabilities. Myth. So let's just look at the population of disability. I want to normalize the disability experience just a bit. We know there are 69 million, maybe 70 million Americans with disabilities. We talked before about the difficulty in getting at this number, but about 70 million Americans, give or take, identify as people with disabilities. This does not include those who have long COVID, which became a disability, as we all know, in 2021. There's some overlap with long COVID because many people with long COVID had pre-existing conditions, and we haven't known how to plug this in, but there's about 23 million Americans who have long COVID, some of whom are part of that 69 million already. So we don't know how to parse that out, but not including long COVID, we have a lot of people with disabilities. What is this? 1 out of every 5 Americans, 20%, right? Everybody knows somebody who has a disability. Disability, folks, is a naturally occurring and therefore normal part of the human experience. I don't need to tell a group of tip training constituents that we as a society need to get over and demystify disability once and for all. It happens, okay? And 85% of Americans will experience a disability at some point in their lives. And then let's look at the point here. So this is, it's here. It's been a part of every society known in the history of the world. Disability has always existed. It probably always will. And speaking to the point about how coworkers feel, in fact, most non-disabled workers are not uncomfortable around people with disabilities by their own reports. And when we find coworkers who are, we have an opportunity for discussion, for training, for more awareness, for understanding of disability etiquette, the principles of universal design, and the realization and the fact that an accessible workplace benefits all workers. And no one would argue with John Drummond about his figures. It's a cost-effective way to make sure that more people are entering the workforce. The costs of it are really no big deal, and that when a workforce is accessible, it's easy to achieve. And once we're there, everyone benefits from that. So we have opportunities to share this message with people who may express concerns and reservations. Usually those stem from a lack of understanding. And so we need to take that opportunity and deal with those concerns as they come up. Next slide, please. Myth: people with disabilities have trouble getting along with others at work, have difficulty getting along with others. Well, let's look at the facts here. We do know, and I think this is it's quite interesting. Workers with disabilities are less likely to be written up for violations of social or behavioral norms than are non-disabled workers. Okay. We know that workers with disabilities, this is an unfortunate phenomenon. Workers with disabilities are frequently the targets of harassment, intimidation, and bullying at work, okay? But they are very rarely the perpetrators, okay? So even though coworkers say they're not uncomfortable around people with disabilities, we do see disturbing rates of harassment, intimidation, and bullying allegations. If you look at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's ADA Title I data set in terms of allegations of discrimination, we see that about 20% or so of allegations of discrimination have to do with harassment, intimidation, and bullying. But when we dig in more closely, we see that this tends to be leveled against people with disabilities, but people with disabilities are not the perpetrators of that. So they tend to do just as well as non-disabled workers in terms of conforming with the social norms and policies and practices. They tend not to be, they're not the perpetrators of maltreatment as often as they are the targets of it. We'll go on to the next slide, please. Here's another one, myth: people with disabilities are litigious. They will sue you. Let's look at some numbers here. Although about 50% of workers with disabilities, you talk to people with disabilities who have engaged in the workforce, literally half of them tell us that they feel they have experienced some form of workplace discrimination during their careers, okay? That at some point they've been treated unfairly or inequitably on the basis of their disability. Half of all workers tell us this, yet only less than 2% of workers with disabilities report making a formal complaint about that maltreatment, okay? So people with disabilities frequently experience unfair treatment in the workplace by their own report. They very rarely complain about it, okay? Would it surprise you to know that only 1 out of 500 workers with disabilities has ever been a party to an ADA Title I lawsuit? Not litigious. That's not a very high rate of litigation. And that rate of litigation is actually very similar to the litigation rates of other protected classes under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Women, members of minoritized racial and ethnic groups, the elderly, people with different national origin, very similar rates of litigation among those folks. About 1 out of 1,500 times do they go and actually file a lawsuit. Certainly, there's a greater incidence of discrimination than 1 out of 1,500, but that's the number that people that's the low number of people who actually follow through and join a formal allegation. And let's think about it from the employer side. An employer with 1,000 or more employees, which represents 2% of all employers nationwide, that employer has a 1 in 4,800 risk of being named in an ADA Title I allegation, not a lawsuit, just an allegation of any kind in any given year, okay? So employers are not frequently responding to ADA Title I complaints. When they do respond, they're not worried about it. They tend to prevail in EEOC investigations, but we see this funneling from a 50% rate of workers with disabilities feeling unfair treatment, at least at some point in their work lives. Very few make a formal complaint of any kind. Very few use Title I of the ADA, and those who do have a very similar pattern as we see for other protected parties in civil rights legislation. And then employers, once again, really don't expect to be the subject of these kind of complaints. Putting all of this together, I would submit to you that people with disabilities in general are not particularly litigious, and we need to let people know about that whenever we hear a concern related to that. The next slide, Dr. Shepard-Jones, looks like a great graphic on your TIP training project. That is excellent. And the one after that is, hang on just one second. Yeah. And that's really the, I'm sorry, I'm going out of order here. The final slide is simply a graphic there, and ends up being kind of where we close off with after completing that final myth and misconception. My contact information, I just want to look and make sure. Dr. Shepherd-Jones, I don't know if it's here. We can
We
certainly make it
have,
available to anyone. I
it
see it
is
now. I do.
on the
It
thank you
is.
slide, rumrellp at
Yes, yes, it is.
msu.edu.
Yes,
So,
yes.
and we would,
Sorry for the less than smooth transition to the final slide, everyone. But I do want to take this opportunity to thank you all for joining this master class. I love that just sounds good, and I'm happy to have been a part of this first voyage here with your TIP training program. I'm happy to hang around and entertain questions, comments, discussion points. And John, I have my calculator here, so go ahead and throw a math problem at me. I'll do my best. But it's been a great pleasure to talk with all of you. We've made tremendous progress in this work worth doing. And the fact that we have more good work left to do, I view as encouraging and inspiring, not discouraging. And I want to just close by thanking you for everything you all do to help people with disabilities achieve their goals and realize their dreams. Don't you dare think it doesn't make a difference. Dr. Shepherd-Jones, thanks again for the opportunity, and I'll hang around for a while.
thank you so much, Dr. Rumrell. That was amazing. You set a very high bar for our master classes. As we wrap up, I do want to mention that the slide that is currently up has a QR code that you can scan, or the link should be in the chat for evaluation of today's masterclass. Please help us plan for future topics and activities by completing the evaluation. And if you have any other questions, Dr. Rumrell has shared his email address. You can also contact me at kjone@uky.edu. And I also would welcome everyone to check out the TIP history and library that are available of resources at tiptrain.com. And this masterclass will also be part of that very soon as well. So again, we want to thank you all and thank you for staying, Dr. Rumrell, but we will officially close out here. And if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to share them now.